All right, everybody, welcome to episode number 53 of Collectible Live. Today is Sunday, November the 20th, 2022, and my name is Jeremy Lee. I would like to thank everyone who tuned in last time with our guest, Scott Roskine, the Chief Visionary Officer at Beckett. You can check that video out on both the Sports Card Live and the Collectible YouTube channels. But let's bring out this week's guest. He's the founder of Standard Gaming, Brett Charville. Welcome to Collectible Live. I got to say, as the intro was playing, I saw you kind of smiling watching that little intro video for Collectible Live. What were you thinking about that?
I like the one where, hey everybody, thanks for having me, Jeremy. I like the one where it's like three of your head, like really close together, like a right. Mosaic pattern. You know, it's like very nuevo art. Yeah, love it.
Yeah, I like how they put that together. Well, anyway, Brett, it's great to have you on the show. Well, welcome to the show. This is, as I mentioned, episode number 53. So we've been going for well over a year now. And anyway, it's great to have you. I always like having on Collectible Live, in industry insiders from verticals that are not necessarily simply sports cards, which is where I really focus my interest on sports cards. I love when we have people from memorabilia, tickets, magazines, now, photos. Now we have video games. This is really interesting to me, Brett. And maybe it's partially because I grew up in the 80s playing the Atari 2600. I graduated into the NES, the original, well, not the original, not the Famicom, but the original North American version with Super Mario Brothers. I'll tell that story a little bit later. But it's always fun to learn more about some of these other collectible niches. And I think you're perfect for this. So let's jump in. And what I wanted to talk about first with you was Standard Gaming is a company that you founded pretty recently, for relatively speaking. Why don't you let us know what is Standard Gaming and how did you come to found the company?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been in collectibles my whole life. Started a long time ago. We can get into that later. But a few years ago, I was executive at Collectors Universe. I think we're also going to get into that. But for me, Standard Gaming, I was collecting games myself, collecting graded games. There was a real kind of hole, I think, in a couple different facets of collectible video games and graded video games. The two big things that we're trying to do out of the gate is give people knowledge, variant guides, easy to understand content. A lot of stuff you find yourself, kind of going down these rabbit holes of message boards and stuff like that. The information can be out of date, kind of inconsistent. And so really want to give people kind of free, quick, digestible bites, information around what they're buying. And then the second one is just giving people, a direct purchase option. Right now, you kind of have two options. You kind of have auction, the major, we know the Heritages, the Goldens of the world have auction platform. You can be patient. You can wait for, what you're looking for. On the other side of the coin is kind of eBay, which can be a bit of a minefield. People, it's mostly, we all know eBay's not so much of an auction platform anymore, as much as it's, more of a marketplace, and buy it now can be, pretty aggressive markups and stuff on there. So we're trying to just keep it really simple, really direct, instantaneous, simple, easy to understand marketplace, direct purchase. You can come in, you can buy your first graded video game if you're coming from sports cards or rare coins or memorabilia, and feel pretty good about the whole experience.
Okay, right on. So for everybody watching, if you're listening on podcast, standardgaming.com is your website, and you can follow Standard Gaming on Instagram at Standard Game, and I'm waiting for it to come back across the ticker for me. There it is, at Standard Gaming Official. So be sure to check that out if this interests you. And I mean, if you're anything like me, it does interest you because you grew up in the 80s playing video games. I'm going to quickly tell you my personal video game.
Yeah.
I grew up in the early 80s on the Atari 2600, with Combat that came with the consoles. And then I got my wisdom teeth out in grade 9. And my mother went and bought me a Nintendo, the NES, that came packaged with Super Mario Brothers, which was such an upgrade from Combat that came packaged with Atari. And I was home.
Is this 1985, 1986, 87?
I think I was 14 years old, 86.
86.
Yeah, 86. Yeah. So she brought it home, and I was off school for a couple of days because my wisdoms were impacted. So I came out of the surgery with I was swollen out to here. Yeah. And I had I don't know, 4 or 5 days at home. All I did was play Super Mario Brothers, to the point where I pretty much I won't say I mastered it now that I see people doing these marathons.
Yeah.
Got to the end and I found that trick on one of the stairs where you could jump on the little mushroom guy and keep on jumping, get 99 free men.
Yeah.
I came upon that by accident, and I thought I was like,
there was no internet to learn that. I mean, if a friend didn't figure it out and tell you, you were on your own, right? I mean,
yeah. So, and listen, that's why it's fun for me to have you on, because, and one of the props I know you're going to show, I mean, that hits right home
memory lane in a little bit. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that is nostalgia at its core for me. So, let's just, before we get on, I want to hear more about your history as a collector. Let's say hello. We got Contender in the house. What's going on, Contender? D Caps says that Charville is the GOAT. Very nice. Albert Jones, welcome to you. SNES and Nintendo 64 for life. I did pick up a 64 later, but nothing was the NES for me.
Sure.
Rory says I should have kept my Chrono Trigger and Earthbound for SNES seal. Yeah. I mean, we all have those always shoulda, couldas, right?
Yeah.
Still needs an Earthbound. I don't even know what that is at this point. So
we'll get you there.
So why don't you take us back a little bit? I'd like to hear really about your collecting history through until you started, and then take us through when you did start at Heritage, which is, I think, your first really professional work within the collectibles industry.
Yeah. So I'll you were talking about speed running Mario. So I'll try to kind of, speed run my life story real quick here to not put everybody to sleep. But yeah, so I'm 37. So I started as a Heritage intern, Heritage Auctions, Dallas. Everybody knows Heritage. When I was 20, that was still kind of a new novel thing, to go intern at an auction company, 17, 18 years ago. And they put me in the rare coin department. I was interested in all collectibles, had been collecting comics, video games, coins, sports cards, pretty much anything I could get my hands on. They put me in the coin department. I like to tell people, especially when I was at Collectors Universe later, I'm a collectibles guy. Heritage put me in the coin department, and that set me on about a 15-year path of being a professional coin dealer. So was there professionally after college for a few years, did a 2-year stint at a company in Tulsa. And then in 2012, I started my own rare coin business, Standard Numismatics, and ran that for about 7 years. Sold that in 2018, averaging a little over about 25 million a year in sales, 5 or 6 employees, nice business. And that was really great. Over that time, I was one of the largest submitters to Collectors Universe. It's interesting, we kind of talk in these different kind of order of magnitudes, but at the time, there was about a 5-year period where I was spending about $500,000 a year on certification fees at PCGS, the coin division of Collectors Universe. Got to know people there pretty well. Prior president left, did about 40 interviews. We were a publicly traded company at the time. Eventually was offered the role to be PCGS president, and took that role in end of 2018. And so did that, and that to kind of just we can come back to some parts on this, but it was kind of a whirlwind about 3 years. Just really interesting. I like to tell people when I talk about working at Collectors Universe or being an executive at a grading company, is you kind of go from being the head, you kind of go from playing in the NBA to being like the head referee, where all of a sudden, like best case scenario, 50% of the people in the stands, are happy with you, and it's as you're probably learning and stuff, it's really interesting. Another, one more analogy that the chairman of the board, Bruce Stevens, told me at the time was, your whole life you've been driving around in a speedboat, and now you're in like an oil tanker. And, kind of learning that, going from having 5 employees to about 250 employees. Collectors Universe has a big coin office in Shanghai and Hong Kong and Paris, and kind of managing all that. And then COVID hit, and, there was people talking collectibles. There were kind of 2 phases of COVID, right? First phase was we thought the world was going to end, and, who would want to collect things when there's a global pandemic? And then the second phase was, kind of a tidal wave of activity and business and, all that sort of stuff. So went through those couple waves, and then pretty much went right into being acquired by Nat Turner and his groups at in the current ownership of Collectors Universe. But great guys that own it now. Nat's great, really good guy, and everybody else there's really awesome and stuff. For me, it was I like to tell people my hairline was like right here, when I started Collectors Universe, and about 2.5 years later, it was back here. So I was like, guys, I believe in what's going on, but I need to get back to playing in the NBA, rather than being a referee anymore.
Right. Oh, great story, man. So let's talk about the 3 years at Collectors Universe. So it seems to me, based on that timeline, that you were there during the big run up of sports cards and the PSA's famous backlog of 14 million cards or whatever it was. What was it like for you being in the organization during that mayhem of where the I don't know what happened in coins. I don't follow coins, but I follow sports cards pretty darn closely, and it was blowing up. What was it like for you being in the organization, seeing what your counterparts at PSA were going through? Were they asking for help from PCGS? Were you what was that like?
It's fascinating. So when we were a publicly traded company, we were a 6-person executive team. Joe Orlando was our CEO. We had a CFO, and then we had 2 division presidents. PSA was Steve Sloan at the time. I was PCGS, the coin president. And then we had a CIO and a VP of ops. And so we made kind of it'd be an insult to Jedis to call us a Jedi Council. We were the 6 executives at the company. And when I started, PCGS, the coin division, was the biggest division at the company, doing about 2.5 million coins a year. PSA, I think, was doing about 2 million cards in 2018 a year. And it's been pretty wild because over the last 4 years, I oversaw, record growth. We broke, every record of PCGS, number of units, all this sort of stuff. But PSA went just completely, I in that time, right? So, we're talking about in 2018, they were doing 2 million cards a year. They're doing 1 million cards a month now.
Yeah.
It's an order of magnitude different. There's a lot of shared resources at the company. The same person that's going to seal a card into a plastic holder is also, going to seal a coin in a plastic holder. And so there's a lot of overlap there. COVID obviously presented a lot of challenges. Maybe a silver lining of COVID was that it forced us more into shifts. We were having trouble before COVID talking guys and gals into working the night shift, and COVID hits, and it's like, we have to work the night shift, not only for safety reasons, because we need to spread out, whole company kind of becomes a checkerboard if you think about it, right? In terms of spacing, and you got somebody at a cubicle sealing next cubicle over. Well, nobody can sit there because of COVID, so, all these different sort of things happening, but, really just, 35-year company, 35-year-old company, probably the most interesting 3 years somebody could be there, I would think. Pretty remarkable.
That's pretty cool. Here's a question I just thought of, and it has to do with you transitioning from coins and into video games. Coins, to me, as a collectible, is a historical thing, right? You got ancient Greek coins, going back to you've got shipwreck treasure coins and all these different really cool things, but they're so historical, they're so old, and sort of like, I guess, tickets to a degree. They're not making them anymore, really. you've got some of the mints are making their commemorative coins, but for the most part, coins are, as is paper money, kind of going away, right? It's not like it was 15 years ago. Contradict that with, or compare that to video games. And I guess where I'm going is that a lot of the coins, I would think, are probably graded by now, unless people are, old people are passing away, the recipients, the beneficiaries of their estates are coming to these collections, grading them to sell them is probably the way to go, just like it would be with sports cards. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the majority of them might be graded already, with there not being a lot more new coins coming into existence, and that's a guess. I don't know that for sure. I'll let you correct me after I've done this.
Your hunch is correct in that I don't want to say all good coins have been graded, because there's still the hunt there, but I would say when I was at PCGS, something, if a 6-figure coin walks into a store in Toledo, Ohio, and it gets graded, that's a newsworthy event at this point, where PSA and then probably WADA, the video game grading company, are regularly grading 6-figure items, and it's not it's not too big of a deal. There's still a lot of resubmissions and stuff like that, and coins and crossovers and stuff. There's a big nonprofit that helps out in coins, the American Numismatic Association, and their motto is "History in your hands." Right? To your point, I mean, there's thousands of years history and track record on these items. It is very interesting. People, as I was a coin dealer, people would say, well, I don't have change in my pocket anymore. Do you think this is going to persist? And, the most collectible coin is a silver dollar. And we really, as a country, haven't used those since like the 1930s. Same thing with, video games, the new, there's a version of the new PlayStation, the PlayStation 5, that you can't insert a game into it, right? I play a Nintendo Switch. I got to admit, I download the games most of the time. I'm probably going to get roasted for saying that by the peanut gallery, but so it's interesting. I think it all persists, right? I would argue that Mario or Michael Jordan in sports cards has just way more of a worldwide cultural significance than probably about anything we could do with coins or paper money. Probably.
Yeah. No, that makes sense to me. And so, I guess what I'm thinking is that first of all, I think it's really cool. I love history in your hands. That's a great motto. And I don't think that collecting coins will ever go to personally, from the outside looking in, that it will ever go to the wayside, because it is history, and money doesn't go away just because the paper or metal form of it does. Mm-hmm. It's still money, and that's the history of money. There's a new set called Currency, a card set came out called Currency by a toy company that's out there now. Pretty interesting. But where I was going with that is when it comes to then video games. So coins are historical. Most of them are graded, let's just say for ease of discussion. Whereas grading video games is relatively brand new. All the video games that exist are potentially gradable, except for those that are, the boxes are trashed, whatever it might be. So what's it like for you to go from coins and that sort of just that outlook to video games, where it's like all of a sudden the world's your oyster again? There's so much potential pipeline of units to run through the grading system, like say for WADA, but you're not at Standard Gaming. I guess I should clarify, you're not in the grading business. You're in the platform, the sales platform business. So it's a bit different. But I think a lot of people are curious about the grading of video games and how for that collectible vertical, it's all there. It's all new. It's like we're
and so it's and I wish I would have looked up the PSA stats before I got on here, but PCGS and their largest competitor NGC and coins, they've graded and certified and encapsulated a combined more than 85 million coins. And let me get my math right. I think WADA, WADA is the preeminent, grading service alongside VGA and now CGC. They've graded, I think, about 250,000 video games. So for some comparison, in my career as a coin dealer, I have submitted more than 250,000 coins to grading services. So when it comes to putting things in plastic that are collectibles, I have a lot of experience with it. But the video game market, it's kind of the wild, wild west, and a big part of what I want to try to do is make it not as much be the wild, wild west, so people are more comfortable with it. And people, a negative thing about the coin market is because a lot of older people collect coins, there is sort of a telemarketing element to it and stuff like that. Coins can sometimes be a tool of choice to, a sleazy phone salesman or something like that.
Sure.
And what we worry about in coins is that if somebody's super interested in coins, but they get burned the first purchase they make, they buy something for $1,000 that's worth 200. They're probably never coming back to that collectible, And so that's one of the most important things. And that's why I really appreciate you having me on here, is we're talking to, people at your sports cards, you're thinking about video games. Where can you go? What can you look at? What can you do to just have that good first experience? And that's really kind of what we're trying to make standardgaming.com.
That's very cool. And I mean, I don't think, the video game collecting industry hasn't been a stranger to controversy and that sort of thing, just like all of the collectible verticals are. Are you trying to through Standard Gaming kind of, maybe I'll put it as, level the playing field, or providing education and informational resources to people so that, there might not be any, so people can make educated and purchasing decisions with confidence, and not worrying about anyone hyping up and blowing up prices and pump and dump schemes and that kind of thing, which are, I think they probably exist in all collectible niches.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that briefly?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the, a guy that was actually one of the founders of WADA, told me a couple months ago when he saw our site for the first time, he said, I think you guys having an under $500 section on your website is like, after the creation of the grading services, like the most important thing that's happened to graded video games in the last 5 years. Because I think, to your point, right, people thought of it as this thing where maybe it was like speculation heavy. Nobody writes news articles about this game sold for $1,500. It's the ones that sell for $1 million and $2 million and $100,000 that make the news and stuff like that. And I think, to your point about kind of information and knowledge, when any vertical or anything is new, there's just only so much, compared to sports cards, there's only so many, mainstream articles about it and stuff like that. Right. So you have, an instance where, maybe a new vertical or somebody up and coming, there's something that happens that kind of creates like a black eye or a bruise, in the segment. If there's only so many articles about it, about the entire hobby as a whole, that's going to be maybe a higher percentage of them than almost kind of what's fair, in terms of the overall, sentiment and what collectors are doing every day and stuff like that. So I think a lot of it is just, it's they say what time heals all wounds. Well, it's actually like time and like a lot of content and like positive, and just, I think people, doing the right thing and stuff like that. But I think graded video games are really on the right track. And WADA's done a great job the last couple of years. CGC, which, as you probably know, is a comic, grading company. They just launched a few weeks ago and stuff. And I think that's pretty exciting too. So, yeah.
So there's three options now for grading video games: WADA, VGA, and CGC.
Yeah.
Do their holders, are they all pretty much kind of like in sports cards? All the holders are pretty much the same. You've got some different color borders, you got different plastics used, but do they all try to keep the cartridge?
Yeah. So VGA has been around for about 12 years, been around longer than a decade. And it was really, so VGA uses a different scale. It's a 100-point scale, but they go like 80, 85, 85 plus 90. And it can be a little confusing. Personally, or not personally, I think it's pretty factually. When things really started to take off a few years ago in graded video games, it had a lot to do with the advent of WADA grading service. They use a 10-point system that mimics comic grading, where you go 10, 9, 8, 9, 6, as opposed to, 10, 9.5, down the line. And CGC, the company that just launched, is gonna effectively kind of conform to that standard with a few minor differences. So that is actually one of the something that I hope in the coming months, years, becomes a little bit more clear in video games. I would maybe list that as maybe one of the bigger obstacles, in that there's a legacy grading company, VGA, that's really good, but they kind of use a different scale than WADA. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a challenge. It can be confusing to a new entrant who sees one grading scale on one holder versus another one. And you're talking to a guy here who's prone to pick up things that remind me of my childhood. And, a slabbed Super Mario Brothers would be, I see Super Mario 3 gets all sort of crazy money. I never liked that game. To me, Super Mario 1 and 2 on the NES that was my jam back in the day. Yeah.
Well, I think a challenge that we think about at Standard Gaming is, you go to our site and we try to be selective with what's on the front page. And if you click, knowledge base, we try to be selective about what you're hitting. And, we're in this TikTok world now where I know that if I'm writing an article on grading standards, you're not going to read it for 20 minutes. We need to get people bullet pointed information and do kind of a good, concise job. And there is a lot to learn in video games. And that's part of the excitement to me But we need to make sure that we're able to present that information in a way that it doesn't, turn off potential new collectors.
Well, I really like this under $500 category you're talking about. I mean, I could see myself picking up a few pieces. So go to a couple comments here. Skeppy says, coin toning, are you a fan or no? And I don't know what that is. I'm guessing it has to do with the metal tarnishing over time, or people doing it on purpose. I don't know, but what do you know can you explain what he's talking about?
And I mean, some people like coins that we refer to as white coins, coins with no tarnish, and some people like tone coins. Naturally toned coins, absolutely, I'm a big fan of. Yeah, that's our left field question for the day.
All right. Yeah. AIH Sports says, I like bullion. The only issue is that the supply is large. Wow. Can you just add some context, kind of just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're interested in bullion, which is just kind of accumulating silver or gold or platinum, I personally, as a rare coin guy, I don't think of that as much as you can't really build a collection out of that, so much as you're more just maybe like accumulating, maybe diversifying, your overall, kind of net worth or something like that. But I would never be personally one to recommend silver or gold or any metals as an investment or anything. The word investment has never came out of my mouth when talking about collectibles, except for this very moment, this one time right now.
Like the rare coin collectible niche isn't about buying silver and gold and stacking it, I think is the term they use.
Yeah.
It's that's in that when people are buying silver and gold, they're buying the coins or they're buying the bullion. They're really investing in precious metals, like you said, to diversify their overall portfolio. I agree. It's not a collection that's so much fun, except you can just look at your money if you like looking to stack.
Yeah, I mean, a good rare silver coin might be worth $10,000, and the underlying metal is worth $12 or something. Right. There's still some intrinsic value there, right? More than a sports card or a video game, to be honest. That's if you set it on fire, you still have $12 of silver, right? But yeah, I mean, mostly we're talking. Typically, a big dividing line in coins is 1964 and prior, for rare coins.
Is that because of like silver content or something like that?
Exactly. Yeah, that's when we took silver out of circulation as a country.
Okay.
So coins went from being, a quarter that you grab in your pocket change, it quit being made out of silver in 1964.
Decap said here, most games I buy are all under $500, makes it fun and affordable. And to me, that's if you're not someone who can afford 6 and 7 figure price tags on games, you can afford a couple of hundred up to $5 and just make a nice display out of it. I think that's I could see myself getting to that, just like I need something else to collect. And
the irony here is that I know Decaps and that he has many games well over $500, but he probably has quite a few under 500 as well. So we'll give him a pass on that. Yeah.
All right. Appreciate that. Well, welcome to the show, Decaps. And Yehuda says, what are the grails of video games? Which is something I'm really curious about as well.
Yeah, we can get into that. So, off the bat, kind of two biggest ones. So another thing we kind of talk about in video games, and I might be able to use kind of some sports analogies here. I hope. One of my favorite sports cards is Frank Thomas, no name on front. Was that Topps 92?
90 Topps, yeah.
90 Topps, yeah. But that's something that's probably cool to you. It's cool to me. If you're just getting into sports cards today, that's probably not going to register the cool factor, out of the gate, sort of thing like that. So that's something that's pretty interesting. I think CGC, the grading companies, they're going to start trying to use the term classic rarities. There are old games. There's a game called Stadium Events. Yeah. Where if you're collecting Nintendo set, you're trying to get all 850 or whatever games, and you want one of each. Stadium Events is the rarest one. But nobody. I mean, I don't think anybody yet has gone to standardgaming.com and searched in Stadium Events, because most everybody that's new is looking for, Mario, Zelda, Pokemon. As a result, so the most expensive game to sell is a copy of Super Mario Bros. Your classic version, sold on through Rally last year for $2 million to a private collector. This is one of my favorite things about video games. I'm going to use one of my props now. So there's 3 different ways you can collect a video game. You can collect just the cartridge. Usually, a lot of those aren't graded. You can go complete other end of the spectrum. A game is sealed. It's still in its original, shrink wrap. I got a, modern Pokemon game here. You can hardly see it, but this still has a plastic. You can kind of see it in there. Yep. Still has a plastic shrink wrap seal and stuff like that on it. So that's a sealed game. The middle ground is what's called complete in box, where somebody opened the game, played with it, kept all the components. And these are still pretty darn rare. I don't know about you as a kid. I never kept any of my boxes as a kid. I have a few manuals. Speaking of Earthbound, my favorite game as a kid was Earthbound. I have the player's guide. I have the game. I didn't save the box. The box alone is worth $1,000 now,
right.
Sort of thing. But so Super Mario Bros. Being kind of the grail of grail in sealed condition. That's what I really love. So this is a complete in box copy that is WATA graded 6.5 on the 10 scale. Sorry, I'm bad with my camera. And this is about a $700 item. And so the big disparity, so the one that sold for $2 million was graded 9.8 and it was sealed, making it, the finest one of this. What I really like about this as an example is this would be like if you could get a 52 mantle in 5 for $800, where it's the same thing. It's just a lower state of preservation,
Right.
And that's to me one of the most compelling things about video games is that I think two things about video games. I've done every collectible. I collect comic art. I've done comic books, cards, Pokemon cards, video games, everything. Video games to me are the thing that when you hold it in your hand, the nostalgia that it conjures and stuff like that, because you have such more interactive moments with it, right? Where, I collected cards as a kid. There's some old sports cards. You hand me a Joe Montana rookie, I'm going to remember seeing it with my dad and stuff like that. But this, you have hours, days, weeks of memories, oftentimes with friends and stuff like that. And so that's, kind of one of my favorite things, about it is that virtually everything that is a grail and very high grade, you can buy a lower grade copy and from 6 feet away on your shelf, same, which I think is really, really great about the hobby.
Yeah. So you've been explaining it and sharing all this information. I just keep thinking to myself, who would have thought that some shrink wrap would be worth just shy of $2 million?
Nobody. That's why it's worth $2 million, right?
Exactly. Which is a similar way that sports cards, that's that organic scarcity, the organic rarity, I should say, that just because mothers were throwing out attic cleaning, throwing out their kids' cards and what we were doing with them. Just like you said, I didn't keep my Super Mario, but when I went and bought when I got my first Super Mario, and then I was adding more and more games, I'd go to the store to buy games. I remember buying the first Zelda in the gold cartridge that had like a hole in the box so you could see the gold cartridge through it. I'm sure that's probably a grail right now. Yeah. I remember buying one of those for $50 or $60. Gosh, I wish I bought a second copy and kept it in that state, right?
Two quick things. So to your point, that Zelda game would probably be kind of the number 2 grail. There's some sealed copies have sold. I think one brought just under $1 million last year. And same thing, you can buy a complete in-box unsealed copy for, we sold one for $325 a couple of weeks ago, graded copy and stuff like that. Really, really cool. And it's, I don't know. It's just, I get a smile on my face. It excites me so much, but
$325 for a unit like that to put up there on a shelf. Like, to me, that makes sense. That's something that I could get my head around and, put out that kind of money. 6 figures on it. Hey, I'm not knocking that. It's just, I just have my interest is elsewhere. But I want to bring up Gross Bros asks this question: how much does it generally cost to grade a video game like the slab you just showed? He said those cases are wild. They are pretty cool. What is it usually? What's an average cost?
Well, plastic, yeah. So it is more expensive. Post pandemic now, it's card grading got very expensive very quickly. A year and a half ago. But so this is like a modern game. WATA starts at about $40 a game. Something you can get like a vintage game sealed for about as cheap as $60. CGC and VGA have similar pricing. And yeah, pretty quick turnover right now. I mean, it's like 4 to 6 weeks at WADA. They're pretty caught up. Like everybody, they got behind, when things got crazy. Yeah.
Okay.
And they're starting. I mean, this is. I think I have a feel for their plastic costs, and it's more than a PSA holder in plastic.
I've heard. Correct me if I'm wrong. This might be a misunderstanding because it seems wild to me. I don't know which grading company it is. Perhaps it's WADA or VGA, where there is some sort of QR code on the outside of that holder, that slab, where if you scan it, you can actually play the game on your phone or on a device. Am I making this up or?
No, I think that's still on the wish list of, okay. I got excited for a second. No, that was something I know they were talking about a couple years ago, but there's a lot of, Nintendo is a historically litigious company, and that would be that'd be a one-day goal. But yeah, that would certainly be amazing. Yeah,
okay.
That would certainly solve the whole thing of how are you going to play it, Right. And that's something I'd love to touch on real quick because I wasn't quite around at the beginning of comic book collecting, but I know when comic book grading, beginning of comic book grading, about 25 years ago, that was the number one thing is, how am I going to read this comic? And, kind of that commoditization of the product, it allows, everybody said, well, when your Amazing Spider-Man issue 1 is worth $200, you're like, well, maybe I'll want to read it. And then because you got it graded, it went from being worth, 200 to 5,000. And you're like, maybe I'll just download the digital copy, And I think it's the same thing with video games, all the best speedrunners in the world don't use original hardware anymore, and stuff like that. There's so many ways to play these games, which I think really is just, another, great facet of this hobby. Yeah.
Yeah. No, even like you said, when you said before, you might get roasted for downloading some games versus, buying the cartridge. But I have a feeling that a collector like yourself might also buy the cartridge if you like the game, just to put it in your collection. So it's not like you're hurting the industry. Yeah. You're supporting both. You're supporting it from both ends, actually. So.
Sure. Yeah.
Decaps asks, what's been the most expensive game Standard Gaming has sold to date? We'll start, and then he has a follow-up after.
Yeah. Well, so we are in the process of selling. Dan, I can't say. We've sold some six-figure games, but I can't say more than that.
Okay, fair enough. He then goes on to say, what is your favorite game in the collection? I don't know which if he's referring to your collection or just the history of video games, but we'll interpret it as you will.
All time and in my collection is my childhood copy of Earthbound that I have. That's still pretty gem for some reason. Yeah.
Skeppy here says that it seems like the early Nintendo Power magazines have taken off in collecting value as well. And I do remember buying those on the newsstand in the 80s. What can you say about those and how that kind of maybe ties into graded magazines? And I had an expert on graded Sports Illustrateds on a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. So Nintendo Power copies are something that even just in the last couple months have really become more prominent. Heritage had some really strong sales, sold off some really high grade copies in the last few months. I think it's something that all the kind of associated ephemera with video games. People collect, cardboard displays from stores and stuff like that of, different characters. And there's all sorts of different ephemera that comes with video game collecting. I think right now with CGC coming into grading video games, because they've been the grader of Nintendo Powers for years because they've been grading magazines. They're a little bit ahead of the curve from some other grading services in terms of doing magazines. So you have kind of a little bit of hype right now around CGC video game grading coming online. And I think that kind of in conjunction with the fact that they've been grading Nintendo Powers for years now, I think is a real positive factor for those. They look beautiful and they're hard to find in high grade.
So if you're somebody like myself who after meeting someone like yourself might decide I'm going to pick up a few graded video games, is there a grading company or a slab that is generally dominating the market similar to the way PSA dominates in sports cards? And how would you guide me? How would you advise me? Would you say, hey, maybe wait for CGCs or stick with WADA? I know now your former company, Collectors Universe, owned WADA as well. So I don't know if you have any bias there. And if you do, that's fine. But how would you advise somebody like me?
Yeah, I mean, I think WADA right now is probably the kind of the most easy to understand in terms of their standards and stuff. You honestly, I really think you kind of can't go wrong with all three. CGC is still kind of a TBD, but they're a very well-run company, the CCG group and stuff. So I competed with them. When I was running PCGS, their coin division NGC, they were our rival, and I have a lot of respect. It's funny, I can say now that they were more well-run than when I was running PCGS. I kind of dunk on myself.
What does that say about Standard Gaming? I'm just kidding. You're not a grading company anymore.
Together, we don't have an office in Shanghai of 35 people that I have to manage. But I think, to me, one of the things that I've found is I think it's really important if you're getting started to kind of try to put yourself on a stroll down memory lane. And whether that's going to a website like Standard Gaming and just looking at everything, because I actually did a coin podcast a few months ago, and they were like, just bring some games, bring some less expensive stuff and just sell it to us. We want Mike Tyson's Punch Out, and we want RBI Baseball. And they were naming these titles. And then I brought other stuff, and I brought Excite Bike, NES, black box title. And I brought Excite Bike, had no idea that these guys that are a little older than me, played it when they were a kid. And I mean, it just triggered this nostalgia with them, where if you would ask them to list out all their video games that they liked as a kid, they wouldn't even have thought about it. And then when I showed it to them, just, oh my gosh, we played this so long, and we did X, Y, and Z with it. And we knew, every facet of the game and stuff like that. So I think really, kind of put yourself in a position where you're, take a look at everything. And I think it'll kind of fire some synapses with people and stuff like that. And then,
what I won't do, Brett, I remember when the NES first came out and new games were being released, I'd go to the store to find a game to buy. Like, I'm going to buy a game. I didn't have a target. It was just I'll buy whatever came out. I walked out one day with Clue Land, and I got home. I was like, this game sucks. Like, this is just horrible.
Yeah.
Like, is that a game that has value now because people probably didn't care about it?
Yeah. So, there's 30 games in this original black box series that all kind of look kind of ubiquitous. And it's actually kind of interesting that there was, and I'm not a super expert on the history of video games, but I'll try my best here. There was a pretty big crash in the video game market with Atari before Nintendo came on the scene in late 1985. And something that people had a problem with is that the Atari covers for boxes were awesome. And people would see, like Spider-Man or, Mario, Donkey Kong, these awesome, beautiful covers of this box art. And then they'd get the game and, it's like a guy, jumping over, mushrooms or something like that. And they're like, this doesn't add up. It made consumers unhappy. Nintendo very strategically, intentionally, put a screen grab from the game on the front and said, hey, we're not going to have some crazy cover that kind of get almost like false advertising, in a sense. So I think that's pretty interesting. So, I think what I'm going to say right now is if you, now that you know that about Clue Land, if you still bought it, that's kind of on you,
I did. And you know what? I might be apt to picking up another copy of it now just because of that memory that I have. So I never forget that lesson.
Sure.
So let's talk about you're at Collectors Universe, and as I titled this episode, why he left Collectors Universe to start his own company. Why don't we talk a bit about that? What was going on there that, whether it was something going on there with the going private transaction, or was it just you looking to get back? And as you put earlier, I think you said, play the game versus be the referee.
Yeah, sure.
Why did you leave Collectors? And in leaving Collectors, you now pivoted from coins to video games. So please speak to both of those changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, as I mentioned, my, to maybe, kind of retell, my 3 years at Collectors, with a little bit more detail, I think something that happens too is you could probably imagine, or that you probably experience a little bit in yourself with TAG, is that, the prior president at PCGS had been there for 10 years, which is a pretty long time. And when I came into that role, everybody, dealers would maybe have some contract, rates where they would get, they'd pay a little bit less if they'd submit, 10,000 coins a year, sort of stuff like that. You might have somebody that has, there's all sorts of different designations and stuff like that in coins, hey, you guys called this mint state, but would you look at it again and would you call it a proof? Would you say that the finish is different? All this sort of stuff like that. So the first kind of 6 months at Collectors Universe was almost just, I hate to say people taking shots at me, but almost kind of in a sense, like everybody that has a grievance, anything that the prior guy for 10 years said no on, it was like, let's ask Brett now, and so you kind of get through that. COVID hits. You think that you're going to be laying people off. We had a large percent of PCGS, the coin business, is out of Asia at this point, Shanghai and Hong Kong. I went from visiting there quarterly to I wasn't able to go there the last, pretty much full 2 years that I was on the job. It became very difficult. And then Nat's group that ultimately purchased Collectors Universe wasn't actually the first group to come along that looked at purchasing this. And something that happened it was interesting for me. I have a undergraduate business degree and stuff like that, and I consider myself just kind of fascinated by business in general. But something that would happen is a private equity company or some group of investors would come and they'd need more information about Collectors Universe. Joe Orlando, our CEO, he had ran PSA, brilliantly for 20 years, right? So any question that they had about PSA, Joe was able to handle, get on a conference call with investors, anything like that. Also, too, at the time, PSA was on the rise. It hadn't, even before it had kind of really gone orbital, the growth story was really compelling. What Joe's not really a coin expert. So a lot of investment calls, it was like, okay, we fielded all the questions about sports cards. Joe handled them all. Now they have some really tough questions about, the age and population of coin collectors. Brett, here's 3 hours with them, sort of thing. And so, there were kind of multiple, dances before, Nat's group ultimately, purchased Collectors Universe and took them private. And I think out of everybody that we spoke with, it was clearly the best, the best group to do it and stuff like that. And for me, I think kind of to recap that whole process, an analogy I used, it was, it almost felt like we had completed like the 10K, like in record time. And then, Nat and crew came in and was like, all right, guys, like great work. The marathon starts tomorrow, and you're like, just kind of like sitting there, like panting, Yeah. And so for me, it was, I remember sitting with Nat when I told him I wanted to leave. I said, hey, look, man, I don't have anything else lined up. There's other things I'm interested in. I don't think I think you guys are going to win the battle, but like, I don't have the fight in me for the next 5 years. Like I'm going to be like a skeleton, just this role in this job. And it's a really difficult role. And my replacement, Stephanie Staben, who was chief of staff, she's been in the role for a little over a year now. And she's done a tremendous job, as well. It's a difficult job. I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for anybody that runs any type of grading service. Because not only are you going to mess up, but then there's so many things that you don't even mess up that people, have a problem with, in terms of running a grading company. So segued into video games. I've been collecting video games for a few years and had gotten more and more interested in the space. And, coins are great. I love coins. Spent a good amount of time really trying to figure out what I could do that was new and novel, and coins kind of came up empty. Got more and more interested in video games and everything in a sense was new or novel. We use this term infrastructure that we talk about and stuff, and there's just so much to do. And it's a target rich environment in terms of if you want to, grow and help a vertical grow. I think personally, I think video games will ultimately and should have a place alongside comics and cards and coins and stuff as the most popular collectibles that people collect. Yeah.
I agree with that comment completely. I think, coins, I don't know any coin collectors who I've come across in my whole life, whether through, different schools and jobs and family and friends. I don't know anyone who really collects coins seriously the way that I collect cards seriously.
Sure.
it makes me think about stamps as well. We don't hear too much about stamp collecting. I know that it's an aging demographic, if not almost aged off the planet at this point.
Yeah.
And I wonder, if that's the direction that coins may eventually go. But I feel like coins are older than stamps, and email has made stamps are not really used as much, just like hard currency isn't used as much anymore. Meanwhile, video games, really cartridges were pretty much invented, probably earlier than the 80s, but basically became something big in the 80s. And that's recent when we're thinking about the timelines of these different collectibles. So I think your decision's a good one. I'm going to move out of a dying vertical. I don't mean that, but like, I should say maybe fading a little bit into one that's really on the up and up, or that's on the come up.
Yeah, no, and I think and stamps are stamps really. Somebody could write a really interesting book about how stamps died, and what it probably ultimately would be is people not evolving. And I mean, coins, I think, is a good example of your base can age and you can still do well. The good thing about people in their 50s and 60s and 70s that collect coins is that they have disposable income. In terms of, if you're building out, a business, we were at a local video game show in Columbus, and, we're selling games $100, $200, $300 at a time. When I was a coin dealer, you'd have multiple six-figure transactions every trade show, sort of thing. I think with stamps, there was a lot of reticence against grading. There was a lot of reticence against the truth. Nobody wanted there to be like a real price guide in stamps, right? People wanted it to be, the price guide says 800, and just all of us old farts know that it's worth 300. And that's the way, things should be and stuff like that. But, coins, there's a lot of, a fascinating thing about coins is they have a Hall of Fame level. There was a massive coin growth explosion in the late 80s. And that set the stage for, the guys that founded, Heritage, Steve and Jim, Steve Ivy, Jim Halper, and they're coin guys at heart. Greg Roberts at Spectrum. There's like a 10-person Mount Rushmore of coins that really doesn't exist in other hobbies. Really, even sports cards, I would say there's a handful of guys or something like that. So, there's a lot of money in coins, and what we're seeing. What I'm getting at is there's enough people and there's enough brains in coins that we're seeing the evolution of coins. It's slow. It'll always be an older demographic. But there's positive and negatives to that demographic change. I don't think they could have explosive growth, where PSA had, year over year, 400% growth or something. At PCGS, we were really happy with 12% growth, or something. But yeah, the story isn't written on video games, I think, is just very compelling to me as somebody who's been in collectibles a long time.
Yeah, no, that certainly resonates with me. A couple comments coming through. We're not going to get into the questions because we just don't have time right now. But Decap says, my 80-year-old father collected stamps. Yeah, I mean, lots of people did and do, but they're just not. Oh, here, I'll keep on going.
There you go.
Paul Carl says stamps are huge. The book Money Stamps is one of the best I've read on any collectible. That I'd actually really like to read that just to inform myself.
Write it down.
Yeah, Money Stamps. That's thanks for that, Paul Carl. And he, he says stamps are huge, which is surprising to me that they're still huge, but that's just because I'm not looking for them. I'm not looking for the conventions. I'm not going to the stamp store, the stamp LCSs to see what people are buying and selling. Yeah. I don't know if there's any. Usually they're coin and stamp. You'll see a coin and stamp shop in certain cities and that, but I don't see anyone talking about stamps anymore.
Huge is maybe a relative term here. I don't know. Yeah, but
you don't think
I'll check out the book for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Paul says here that the sidebar stories in that book are worth it alone. Good to know. I'll definitely check that out. So that's okay. We're coming up on time here, Brett. So let's talk about the infrastructure of collectibles, because that's something that you wanted to touch on. And I think you're the perfect person to talk about it, because you have so much experience with coins in one of the biggest companies in collectibles.
Sure.
Now you're working now you founded your own company, Standard Gaming, which is really a piece. It's a cog in that infrastructure of video games. Other infrastructure or building blocks of collectibles that you mentioned to me, and I'll mention them, and then you can
Sure.
speak. Grading, collection tracking, pricing, marketplaces, vaulting, a set registry program, price guides, which goes with pricing. I think we take a lot of these for granted in cards, but they don't necessarily exist in video games. With that launchpad, I'll turn it over to you to speak to the importance of these things.
Yeah, and that's it's I think you just hit kind of all the ones I had in my notes. A couple things I like to talk about coins real quick. There's a price guide in called the Red Book in coins, and it's among 6 or 7 different really strong price guides in coins. The first Red Book came out in 1947, and it's been continuously running ever since then. You have somebody like with the sports cards and coins, you have how many, you're approaching tens of millions of data points with auction record price points and stuff like that. You get into all these different things, and it's very fascinating to think about. People really, I think, kind of take for granted a lot of that. It's like you're driving and you take roads for granted, and major trade shows, trading networks, different price guides. I think the set registry program, we probably don't have time to get into it, but I know on the coin side, on the sports card side, massive part of those hobbies. There's a federally chartered nonprofit I touched on, the American Numismatic Association. They have a 2-week long summer camp every summer in Colorado Springs for people that collect coins. And I used to teach a week-long course on coin grading. I used to teach with 2 other guys. I would teach intermediate coin grading for a week. And it was really fun because everybody in the class is either 14 years old or like 75. and they're all falling asleep at like 2:30, right? But I mean, that's how structured coins has became. There's a federally chartered museum about coins. They have courses. This isn't, like the Collectible Expo in Vegas that was awesome, right? I forget what was the name of it. I mean, that's really cool. This is like purely for hobbyists, and there's all this sort of stuff that, I think if I was able to do 2 of the 10 things that I just rattled off, in video games over the next 10 years, I think it'd be great for the hobby, and it's all stuff that the hobby needs. And it's probably stuff that needs to occur before the hobby really grows. I think the grading services will take leadership, with price guides, set registry, more variant guide information and stuff like that. And it'll take some time, but I think this really is kind of the ground floor of graded video games right now. It's really exciting to be here.
Definitely. It seems like video games can leverage the experience of coins and sports cards as far as what pieces of infrastructure need to be put in place. I don't think it's rocket science there. I think we listed most of them. Yep. So that's pretty cool. I want to bring up this comment by Triple R TV. Says it's almost better just to collect $1 a day than collect anything, as he looks at his room full of collections. I mean, I think we all sometimes have that feeling of, what am I doing with all these things? But I know I'm never going to stop collecting cards. So,
one of my favorite truisms in coins is, if you think a coin, because aesthetics is very important in coins, because coins do tone and tarnish and they get marks on them and stuff. And there's this old adage in coins that if you think a coin is visually pleasing, others probably do too. And I think part of that is you kind of need to be honest with yourself. If something's really beautiful, if something's not beautiful, you can't really kind of advertise it as beautiful. And I think the same thing applies in all collectibles, right? If you think something is really cool, if you think Incredible Hulk 181 is really cool in comics, other people probably do too, And I think, we were talking about Mario and stuff like that. And I think if you're coming over from sports cards or memorabilia or coins and you get into video games, there's a little bit of a learning curve, but you're going to be a fish, you're going to go from out of water to in water. I think pretty quick if you've been in collectibles a while.
Yeah. No, well said. Random Rick Review says, yep, and yet I still collect. Got to get on that hoarder show goals. Yeah, for sure. Welcome to the show, everyone who's new. If you're not yet subscribed to Collectible or Sports Cards Live on YouTube, please take a moment and do so if you would be willing. And great. Okay, this show is called Collectible Live. Collectible is the fractional ownership platform for sports cards and memorabilia. I don't know if they're going to move into other. I shouldn't say I don't know. I think they're going to move into maybe some other verticals within collecting. Perhaps video games is one of them. I like to ask every guest is how do you see fractional ownership fitting into the overall hobby landscape? And in this case, video games. You did mention early on in this episode that Rally sold a copy of, maybe you said Super Mario. I forget what you said.
Super Mario Bros. Yeah.
For $2 million.
Yeah.
Rally is a fractional ownership company similar to Collectible. So how do you see fractional ownership fitting into the landscape for video games as we move forward? And do you see it as one of these infrastructure type of pieces?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting. I think fractionalization along with vaulting are definitely two newer pieces to the puzzle of overall collectibles. I know PWCC's been around for a while in sports cards, but the concept of vaulting has kind of came and gone in coins, and it looks like it's kind of here again, and it's here again for other collectibles. I think it's a great question on fractionalization. I think really the thing that comes to my mind is just access. That if you're somebody starting out, and we talk about like the sub $500 section on standardgaming.com, it gives people access and stuff. It's another way to give people access where they can say, okay, this is really cool. I'm probably never going to be able to afford this. I can feel a little bit of ownership here. I can be a part of this. I think that's really great. For somebody like me, I hope that evolves into them then kind of wanting to take the next step, and owning physical collectibles and stuff like that. And I think the more fractionalization evolves, the more the opposite is going to happen too, where the guys that have been collecting video games or sports cards for 20 years, but still, let's face it, like I would think 99% of us and people in the chat right now can't afford a Manolin 10 right now, but if you can have a sliver, and it's really cool. And I think that will appeal to people that even the most hardcore physical collectors over time, I think just the draw will be too great, as it evolves more and stuff like that. But it's certainly been an exciting addition in collectibles over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I think it's still in its infancy and has some growth to achieve here still, but I think it's here to stay myself. Okay, we'll do final comments, then we'll come to from the chat, then final comments from you, Brett, then we'll end this. Random Rick, I don't know what a Zoomer is, but he says Zoomer is pushing up prices on even lame old games. I always say, it's up to you to collect or buy what you like. If you don't think it's lame, that's fine. If someone else thinks what you collect is lame, I just say, I don't care,
Yeah, you and I are cut from that same cloth of, and it's part of working at a grading service too. You see something you don't like over here and you collect over here. Why do you gotta, which way am I looking here? There's a lot of things in collectibles I don't understand. And if it doesn't, I don't know, just pay it no mind. But
exactly.
If games that you don't collect are going up, great if you're a long-term collector, right? So.
All right. D-Caps is great show. Great guest. Thanks for the live stream. Thank you, D-Caps.
Thank Dan.
He goes on to say fractional ownership is a Ponzi scheme. I don't necessarily agree with that. Mod Cult says, how does fractional work? Like, who keeps the actual card? What if the company goes belly up? Great and important questions. I can tell you that the assets are kept in vaults, securitized vaults and all that. And they're actually they're not actually owned by the company that does it. They're owned by the unit holders. So that's what would happen is you'd end up getting, probably have to sell the item and get your money out of it. It might take longer than otherwise normal. Gen Z are the Zoomers, been in and out of the video game collection, just not getting back in this round, but definitely an increase in money for sure. I am just going to collect Madden games. They're in my price range. Yeah, collect what's in your price range. Awesome. Collect what you like. And let other people collect in peace. And with that, Brett, final comments to you. I do want to thank you for coming on. This has been really informative. I've enjoyed it immensely, but I'll leave the final word to you and then we'll end this.
Thanks for having me. This has been great. Standardgaming.com if you want to learn about video games more. This is, I don't know, I've become a Jeremy Lee lifer at this point. So it's been really great. I appreciate you having me.
Right on, Brett. Well, thanks again for joining. I'm going to go check out standardgaming.com after this. I can feel myself picking up a game or two to throw on the shelf behind me over the next little while. So thanks for joining again. Thank you to everyone in the chat who is joining. And And for the people that don't like the sound of fractional, just consider that every stock on the stock market is fractional. Vacation ownership can be fractional. Fractionalization has come into just about every asset that there is. Ride sharing, Uber is a form of fractionalization. All these things are fractional. So it's not sketchy. That's not the right word to describe it at all. It's an evolution that's going to take some getting used to for people, but it actually makes a ton of sense if you think about it logically. And with that, Brett, hang tight right there. But for now, everyone have a great week ahead. We'll be back next week, 7 o'clock Eastern for Collectible Live. And until then, have a great week.